Good? What does Bangladesh look like in 2025? Firstly, it looks like the interim government creating a special commission to rewrite the constitution and level the playing field. This looks like having independent processes to appoint high court judges. It looks like removing the reforms that were created by the previous government in the Awami League, for example, that allowed them to vote by and allow them to be corrupt on a massive scale. These things are all removed. It looks like reverting to a level playing field in which you're going to have a fair and representative democracy. Secondly, it looks like courts and investigations. You're trying people who shot the protesters. You're trying to extradite Sheikh Hasina from India, for example, and these are things that help placate individuals on the ground. Because the reason why protesters are angry right now is because they think that this individual, the dictator Sheikh Hasina, has been able to flee to India and has been able to get away scot-free, which is the biggest reason why there are massive protests and instability within Bangladesh on the ground right now. The reason why the 90% of the Muslim population are rallying against the Hindu minority, for example, and that is the reason why these individuals are facing widespread violence and persecution. That is incredibly important in maintaining stability and allowing these individuals to have the solace and have the closure from their traumatic dictatorship. 3 contributions from opening government. Firstly, this leads to a better democracy. Why does this lead to a better democracy? The first thing I'm going to prove under this is that you get a better, more representative democracy, even though it's the case that these individuals have not a very high likelihood of winning. The reason why they are not likely to win, even if they are unbanned, is because it's the case that these individuals were just ousted, and the dictatorship likely remains in the collective memory of individuals on the ground. That's to say that if this team wants to run that these individuals are going to win again, this has to be counterbalanced by a massive harm that is being made by the incumbent political parties, the ones that have not been banned right now. Because it's only in those circumstances where those political parties fuck up to a massive extent will individuals swing dramatically towards the Awami League, which means that this is an important check and balance measure against these individuals. Crucially, I want to explain that the ban of a political party is the burden of a ban on a political party is far greater than just the persecution and redress of past wrongs. So these things can still happen outside the house. We can still compensate individuals and give them redress for individuals who were shot when they were protesting. We can still persecute individuals. We can still do these kinds of good policies. But what they need to defend is a higher burden than that, which is banning a political party outright, which is a bad thing. The second reason why banning a political party outright is just because you silence a lot of individuals. This dictatorship government, this authoritarian government, did not start out as an authoritarian government. The reason why they were able to get to this stage is because they had a massive support base within the country, and because these individuals were able to build connections with certain industries where they gave out subsidies, for example, where they had individuals within the important individuals within these sectors that built close relationships with these political parties, for example, who now fear for their interests. They were able to court FDI to Bangladesh, for example, and court foreign companies to Bangladesh because they were able to promise them favorable terms, for example. And that is the reason why you got a massive group of individuals that are actively caring about the future of these individuals. But lastly, the last group of individuals that's incredibly important in this debate are the Hindu individuals. The 8% of Hindu people population within Bangladesh are a demographic minority. 90% of the population is Muslim. These individuals are I want to note that the counterfactual that they need to defend under that side of the house, the BNL is an Islamist party. They are Muslim fundamentalists. They are actively pushing for the curtailment of rights against women, for example. And I want to note that under the problem with the reason why you need to maintain support from the Hindu individuals within Bangladesh and have their faith within the democracy is because with the removal of the Awami League, which is, I think, these individuals' only way to break into the political scene, these individuals fear persecution. They're already being beaten up on the streets by angry Muslim protesters, and these individuals fear for their lives, which is the reason why if you want to clamp down on instability and you want to preserve the investment and preserve the idea of legitimacy of the interim government within the status quo, you need to keep these individuals and allow them to have a fair shot at an election. Otherwise, these individuals will be incredibly angry. What does this look like? It looks like investor flight. It looks like these important corporations severing ties with the government or being uncooperative. It looks like the Hindu population fearing prosecution and these individuals feeling incredibly scared. And that is incredibly important. Yeah.
So the Hindu population, if they have continued to support the Awami League, presumably they're already a huge minority, and it doesn't make sense for these people to be enraged to the point that they can create national instability in the instance where Awami League is banned.
Right, I'll now deal with this. The last impact of having a better democracy is that this directly resolves the source of protest. The info site fiats that there's already widespread protest within Bangladesh, but does not explain the extent to which these protests are fucking massive. This is incredibly important because this has caused widespread instability within Bangladesh. The cost of living is up 13% year on year. Individuals on the ground, the poor individuals who are incredibly vulnerable, these individuals see their prices rise. They can't buy groceries, they can't make rent because of the economic impact of these protests. The reason why these protests are happening is because the 90% of the Muslim majority are incredibly angry against the Hindus, and these Hindus are actively fighting for their own rights. So they're doing counter-protests against these individuals, and that has created a lot of instability. So this is resolved at the point in time in which all these individuals agree that there is a way forward where they're all able to exercise their preferences via the ballot box, and that is the way in which you resolve these protests. Second contribution, this allows for more legitimacy of the interim government. This is the most important claim in the round. The reason why this is important is because the interim government is the one who is electing the special committee to rewrite the constitution. The problem with this is that this is just basically a tie-on impact from the first argument, but the reason why this is important is because there's no constitutional provision for the allowance of an interim government. So there's nothing in the constitution. So the legality of this can and has been challenged in the courts, and it's incredibly illegitimate. The only reason why this government is successful is because they rely on moral authority and the popularity of the July Revolution, but these individuals are likely to fight back against that at the point in time in which they exercise their power to ban what's seen as the dominant political party within Bangladesh, for example. So you must avoid this harm by not doing things that are perceived as overreach, because people are fine when you do things like rewriting the constitution in order to allow for a fair playing field. What they are not fine with is the point in time in which you try to ban a political party and ban representation. That is an incredibly bad thing. Lastly, you get more cooperation from India under outside the house. Firstly, why is India incredibly important to Bangladesh's economy? They are the second largest trade partner. They have expanded things like trade, energy, and military closeness with the Awami League. And the reason why this is the case is because Modi runs on a Hindu nationalist platform, and the Awami League is a Hindu government. They care about Hindu interests. In the counterfactual, what's likely to happen is that the BNL will take power because of the info site, because they have established power. The problem with this is that this is an Islamist party that actively runs populist and religious fundamentalist narratives that try to radicalize the vast majority of the population. And in that particular instance, India is far more likely to withdraw trade, to withdraw the ability to give aid to Bangladesh, for example. And this is really, really important for the economy. Indian money allows you to build roads, it allows you to build hospitals, it allows you to build education, and it allows individuals on the ground to be able to survive. But the second impact of getting India on our side, outside the house, is the point in time in which India's interests are not threatened. That's the point in time in which they're more willing to extradite Sheikh Hasina, and that's the point in time in which you get more closure, because you're able to ensure India's influence within the Bangladeshi political system, which means they now no longer have a need for Sheikh Hasina. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for that speech, PM. Now calling on the leader of opposition. You're here.
Okay. Sorry. I need to Google notes. I'll take 2 points. I'll prioritize closing. I don't know where my tissue is. Whatever. We agree with government that stability and the restoration of peace is of the utmost importance, but what we contend with you in opposition is the idea that the Awami League is incompatible with the existence of democracy because of the structures they have set in place, but also more importantly because of the violence that has ensued in Bangladesh as a consequence of the policies of Hasina, but more importantly because of the violence that came as a consequence of all her actions, imprisoning people, but more importantly killing massive amounts of dissidents for the massive population. I want to first run a couple responses to this government team. The first is in terms of their accountability. Note that their argument relies on the idea that BAL is a good check and balance to the other parties, specifically because they have other ideas that could necessarily be used. But note that this is incompatible with the very first premise that they run. If they say that they are unlikely to get any votes, unlikely to get any positions, then I'm quite uncertain as to where any accountability would come from, especially if these people won't win seats in the first place. I think their own argument defeats itself. But the second thing I want to respond to is this idea that, there's massive amounts of hate from the Muslim majority, which is precisely why they're hating the Hindus in the first place. But they say that the reason why they are looting is precisely because of the economic instability that came as a consequence of Hasina's government in the first place. Which means that they are looting not because they hate the Hindu minority, but precisely because they have no capacity to live right now because of the economic instability that came from Hasina's policies in the first place. They are doing this out of necessity. They are doing this because they need to survive in the first place, not because they hate the Hindus in the first place. Meaning then that this proves that it's not necessarily because of instability. It's not necessarily because that they hate these Hindus, but necessarily because they have to do this in order to survive. Meaning then that the best way for them to necessarily be helped is for them to be given some degree of economic stability, but also some degree of security, but also more importantly because they hate the government. There are two arguments that we're gonna push. The first is why the existence of BAL in the government fuels violence, but also secondarily why it goes fundamentally against democracy and why democracy can't be restored at the point in which you allow BAL to exist. The first argument is why the existence of BAL in the government fuels violence. The analysis is quite simple. There is a massive opposition to the BAL because of one, there is overt killing of dissidents, which means that any accountability that was tried to be imposed onto BAL was necessarily shut down, which meant that it was impossible to hold them accountable. Secondarily, there's blatant government corruption that took jobs away from average citizens and instead assigned them to either cronies or the relatives of BAL officials, which meant that the vast majority of the population was locked away from government jobs, which is crucial for keeping people alive, which is precisely why these student protests spurred up in the first place. But also third and most importantly, know that BAL rigged the elections, which is precisely why they necessarily there was massively low voter turnout in the last elections, and the BNP even boycotted it in the first place. All of this proves to you precisely as to why the protests and riots happened, but also more importantly, the popular narrative is to oppose the Awami League because of the vast majority of the populace was victimized by the Awami League, which then precisely is the reason as to why they demanded the banning of the league in the first place. Which means then, on their side, what happens when you choose not to ban them? The first thing I want to note is that you go against the popular rhetoric and you go against the demands of the protesters. And I want to note, if you piss off 10% of the population, which is the minority they argue, it's not that big. If you piss off 90% of the population who is the one actively pursuing violence, that's even worse off because they get even angrier. They try to pursue more violence against the interim government. They're going to see the interim government as one that sides with the Awami League in the first place. And that goes fundamentally against any form of reform, but also prevents any form of change in the first place to this extent because you're unwilling to cooperate even with the interim government. And I want to note, the 90% of the population is crucial because you need them to agree with you and work with you to even ensure a transitionary government or even ensure democracy happens in the first place, because if they don't agree with you, you can't set up any democracy, you can't set up any voting, or you can't set up any elections as a consequence of it. But also secondarily, why does violence increase to a higher degree? Because there's massive instability but also insecurity. They fear that the Awami League will try to reinstate their power, and the Awami League will probably try to do this because they are massively powerful. Why does this happen on their side, and why does the Awami League get to regain power? One, they're still consolidated under one political party. They can rally their money, they can rally their media control in order to try to reinstate it, but also try to pursue more violence, which means they're able to mobilize their security forces to necessarily silence the protesters. If this is the way they're going to minimize violence, I think it increases violence even further because these people are scared of the Awami League and they want to shut them down. But also secondarily, I want to note they're going to be unwilling to participate in elections, which means that as a consequence of this, not only does it increase violence, but it also shuts down the possibility for democracy and for people wanting to participate in it. All other parties are unwilling to participate in a democracy that has the BAL in it, specifically because they have cheated in the past and will continue to cheat probably into the future, which then means then on their side there's massive amounts of violence because you don't listen to the vast majority of the population, but also more importantly you stifle any possibility for trying to recuperate, but also more importantly set up a new representative democracy that is within the will and representation of the people. Go. Closing.
So idea is, if someone has literally killed your family, why would you want to vote them back into power? There's no chance that BN ever comes into power, even if they're a consolidated party on your side.
Yeah, they won't vote you into power, but the BAL will still have some extent of power to the extent that they have money, they have a vast amount of control within the government right now, which means that creates fear within the people on the ground. And that's extremely scary for the vast majority of the population. Even if they are unlikely to be voted back into power, the very fact that the interim government is unwilling to ban them shows and signals to people on the ground that they might be working with them, which creates massive amounts of fear, which is what creates the violence in the first place and the massive amounts of dissidents. Go.
The protests are happening because reform is slow. The reason why this is slow is because the rich backers of the Awami League are challenging the interim government in court. When you do this thing, you give them the justification to challenge them in court.
We're perfectly fine with that. We're fine with it being slow as long as we don't have to work with the rich backers, because these rich backers are probably the ones who fuel the violence in the first place, but we're also the people who fuel the violence against the Bangladeshi populace, which is why we're willing to trade them off, precisely because they're the ones who ensued harm in the first place. Why does democracy get restored on our side? The first thing I want to note is it sends a signaling effect to the vast majority of the people on the ground. It notes that they are willing to separate themselves. The Bangladeshi government and the interim government is not working with the Awami League, and they're willing to hold them accountable as a consequence of this, which then means that they restore some degree of trust, and you're willing willing to then give some concessions to them. But also second, this mitigates the extent of protests, especially to the extent that they no longer have to fear the extent of the Awami League, which means that protests will probably die down in the future because they understand they will get some degree of economic security when the new elections roll around, which means that they're not unlikely to persist into the future. This is only happening right now in the short term, precisely because of economic insecurity, which means that if you're able to restore them, it becomes perfectly fine in the future, but also because you're no longer fearing the Awami League in the first place. But also second, when it comes to accountability for these people, note that it's far easier when you ban the Awami League, specifically because now they are fragmented and they are split apart, which means that it's easier to hold these individuals accountable to the extent that you can probably send them to court, but also, for example, hold them accountable because they simply do not have the consolidated power now that comes as a consequence of the Awami League. Maybe they have to join other political parties, which then forces them to subsume these political ideals, which holds them accountable, but also lessens the degree of which they're able to pursue impunity in the first place. Which means then that the possibility for democracy increases, but also increase the possibility for accountability for these individuals who have ensued harm to these individuals in the first place. And this is crucial because this possibility is what restores trust within the vast majority of the populace. And that trust is crucial for rebuilding the nation, specifically because they wanted to opt out of Bangladesh as a whole in its democracy because of the Awami League. The only way to restore democracy only exists when you get rid of the Awami League. Oppose.
Alright, thank you so much for that speech. Let's now welcome the GPM to close the case for opening government. Here.
So we have a parallel debate where it is true that the AL does have a lot of loyalties, but at the same time, they have a lot of people who dislike them. I think the real debate is about how do we interact with this situation to instill more confidence in the new government. The reason why that is more important is because there's no basis of legitimacy in the new government yet. So being able to actively scrutinize and ensure that we extract the most level of confidence out of the population is probably the priority of the debate. They claim that the moment we allow the AL to compete, things are gonna go to shit. Either they cheat or people are just so fearful that they don't go out to vote. I don't think this is true. The reason for that is because if you look at the info slide, the party has been ousted from power. So firstly, it's just not that powerful because you have been able to wrestle out power against them, even though they had control of the military apparatus, even if it's the case that they have control of the military. The second is the illusion of power has been gone. So people look at the party and no longer feel that they can offer them the same security, which means that they cannot offer these places like blind allegiance anymore. So I don't think the AL can just wrestle back popularity from the majority of the population. That deals with their argument. What is the argument that was not dealt with from day one? The AL still have loyalties from people who they offered affirmative actions to. For example, descendants of freedom fighters that they gave positions of power in the government. Like families of veterans who enjoyed special privileges. These are people that still live in the countryside. They are still people that look forward to positive representation from these parties. Additionally, the Hindu minority group. I think this is the actual comparison that's going to happen when you allow these parties, when you allow the AL to compete. The first thing that happens is that I think the AL has to purge itself. The reason for that is because in the AL, there's a spectrum of politicians that are more deep-rooted in the corruption, and I think there are politicians that are not so much so. These politicians have a high capacity to regain political viability insofar as they can show themselves to not be absorbed into that process. If that's true, what is likely to happen is that the AL is likely to purge itself. So politicians with some awareness of what corruption happened can cooperate in the investigation, can sell out these previous politicians. The reason why this is good is because we actually move forward because the population doesn't want just the AL to go away, but to see the country change and to see the deep root cause of corruption being clamped down. Their argument here is that no, these politicians can potentially join other parties. I just think that they're just much more likely to stay within the AL and work towards viability there. And the reason for that is because joining another party, being a party that has been banned, it's pretty scary. Like, I think most people just leave or count out the political viability for themselves. So if it's the case that you do give them viability, I think it's the case that they likely churn. But even if it's the case that they do not churn, even if it's the case that they still hold together and they band together as a party, this is good because now when you have an election, they have to compete against other people. So they just don't get, for example, like news articles saying that are bad. They have to compete against other politicians who call out their bad actions and they have to then defend themselves. If it's the case that they can, then I suppose, and that's democracy at work. But what's likely to happen is that they do have to answer very tough questions. They do have to, for example, example, show the world and show the rest of the population that in fact things were bad and that there is some kind of reconciliation process. Their wrongdoings are exposed because other political parties have an active interest to exploit these things in order to win votes. This is the process in which you instill more confidence in the new government because it feels as though something is being done. I want to talk about the comparative because just because you don't see the AL doesn't mean you have magical confidence in the new nation, because if you've been living in corruption for 15 years because the previous party, the BNP, has been in power before, has been ousted from power, and there were conversations to ban those parties because they were in fact corrupted as well. So it's unclear why is it the case that new confidence in the new nation. The reason why this is important is because that is where the tipping point of the debate is. Insofar as you have buy-in from the people, it means that your election itself is more stable and more representative. People are more likely to cooperate with federal policies. The nation itself is more stable, which attracts FDIs, investment, etc. And that's what spurs the country forward. Any point in which you have an election but you don't have buy-in, you cannot claim this impact. You just have someone in power. But all of these current issues of protest and instability still persist. Before I go on, I'll take one for closing.
Why won't you be held accountable if you end up competing from other parties? Presumably, you'll still be asked questions as to why you supported the Awami League in a certain manner.
Exactly, which is why you will not go to another party, which is why you don't get that access of information in the first place. You don't sell out people from the Awami League because there's no interest for you to do so. But it's the case that you retain your position in the Awami League, you have to do so in order to get political viability for yourself. Excellent concession.
Why is the Awami League likely to churn the worst of politicians if often these are the ones who are backed by the very rich people, as pointed out in the POI?
I think the political will makes it so that it's impossible for them to avoid doing so. The party has been riddled with controversy. Everyone knows about the bad things that they've done. If it's the case that you're still politically ambitious, you have to do this. You will attempt to do it, maybe you will not succeed, but any kind of attempt makes it so that we're a bit closer. If it's the case that we want to, for example, extradite Hasina, if it's the case that we really want to uncover who were the people that were stifling money away from the government, then we need buy-in from these people who have access to, for example, political records and special classified information that is held within the party. If it's the case that we can get those people to do so, then we move forward. Aside from this, I just want to note that there are actually no responses coming out from League 1 for the three responses. They broadly just position the case that insofar as we allow the Awami League to step in, we lose the election altogether. But the material from League 1 was not there. The first one is political legitimacy. If it's the case that we don't protect the integrity of the election, I don't think anything happens. So this is the actual comparative. On outside the house, we have the feasibility of some unrest and some resentment because people don't like the Awami League being able to compete. That does not tip the scale of ruining the election altogether. On their side of the house, maybe these people feel appeased, but just because that happens does not mean the election is automatically more rigorous and automatically more credible. And as I said, the process that we actually need is for people to contest, to debate, for politicians to call out one another so that people feel as though change can happen. If it's the case that Awami League is not there on the table, that process cannot happen to the same degree. It's different when every party bash the Awami League versus them bashing the Awami League, and the Awami League is also there to answer for itself and have to bear the consequences of its actions. I think that process is very catharsis and healing. The second argument is the unrest from the Hindu population argument. So the response coming out from closing is that this is only 8% of the population. Guys, every insurgencies that destabilize governments happen when 2 or 3% of the population turns extremely militant. So just because it's 8% does not mean the capacity to do harm is very low, because they don't have to kill everyone, they just have to create sufficient unrest. So for example, bombings, for example, killings that make it so that businesses lose confidence because they feel it's not a safe place to do businesses, means that attention and investments get diverted away, all of the harms can accrue, even if it's the case that a small group of people are unhappy. If it's the case that they feel as though there is representation, I think they're less likely to do so. But beyond that, it's not about them being able to win the entire government, but having for example, local representative alone is enough. So they only have to win one seat because they feel like that one member of parliament represents them. That one member of parliament can protect them and pass policies domestically within that region in ways that they feel protected. All of that benefits that can accrue, and therefore they're not likely to resort to the worst actions of insurgencies. The last argument is just India being very important. So maybe the outcome of the election is speculative because democracy is just very unstable and difficult to determine. The trade-off that we get on outside is that we get India to step in to continue with the investment despite the instability because of historical allegiances. The best argument that they can potentially have here is that maybe China will step in. Here is the tiebreaker. If on outside the house we can choose between China and India and therefore extract the best trade deals on their side of the house, then reliant on whoever gives you the best deal, but that's not the best deal you can possibly have. So on outside the house we have more options. For all these reasons, OG.
The deputy leader of opposition to close the case for here.
We believe that Bangladesh is not its perfect state right now, but we believe that this ban is a step in the right direction so that we can achieve the ideal state of Bangladesh. I have 3 questions in this debate. Number 1, is the ban necessary? Number 2, is it justified? And number 3, what is the ideal state of Bangladesh? I want to first go to the ideal state of Bangladesh because as opening government points out, they want to say that there are democratic values that people want to be represented because they are Hindus and there's not a lot of voices. The first response I have to this is that it's just unjustified. Like, there is a limit to how much you can allow parties and politicians to participate in status quo. And in status quo, we can also see in many other countries, like in France, I think it's Le Pen who was banned from participating in elections for embezzlement. Neo-Nazi parties in the West and the EU and neo-colonial parties in Asia are very often banned from participating in politics because they incite a lot of violence and they incite a lot of radicalist beliefs, which we think is very aligned with the idea of democracy in many Asian nations, which means that even if you do want to represent them, we don't think that the pathway to be able to represent the Hindu minorities within Bangladesh is through the Awami League. We think that there are other ways. But the second thing I want to point out is that there is a very big problem that opening government is not conceding to. The fact that the Awami League has done many harms to the democracy of Bangladesh. They killed dissidents. They stacked courts against the people. They also made sure that any form of antagonism against them is not guaranteed, which is why they stayed in power for 15 years. Which means that if it is about representation, it is a very bad thing that they allow the Awami League to run because these are the people who are standing against representation and have been staying there for the past majority of the situation, which means that it's unlikely for them to be able to say that they get the higher ground because it's very hypocritical of opening government. What is the extension under this? We would posit that there is better political parity under our counterfactual in Bangladesh. And this is the positive material that explains that Bangladesh in status quo is just BNP versus the Awami League, which is a major authoritarian party versus an opposition party. But as the info slide suggests, there are a lot of other parties that we think can participate in this politics, which means that in status quo under government side, what happens is if you allow the Awami League to continue, it crowds out a lot of the mainstream politics because what we get to focus on is the radicalist politics and how we get to crack down on it and check and balance it, which means that we detract from the actual discussions that we need to have. Things like, for example, how do we repair the constitution? Things like, for example, how do we repair the economy? Things like, for example, how do we ensue more peace between our religions? Which means that more parties like, for example, the JIP and the other parties that are said in the info slide are more likely to rise up and to be capacitated to speak out now because now they have more capacity to be able to say the more nuanced and more more nuanced and more sober discussions that they have versus under their counterfactual, it's more radicalism versus trying to crack down on it. Why is this something that's good? We think that it is good because this capacitates the smaller parties now to become more powerful and to succeed the interim government in the long run, which looks like the NCP becoming more of the moderate party and being more representative of both Hindus and, for example, Muslims, but also allowing more sober discussions in politics, like, for example, now opening up the table for more economic policy, or, for example, how we actually do get to move forward with, for example, the constitution as Prime Minister suggests. And this is primarily good because this means that we can envision a Bangladesh past this political crisis, which means that this ban is the only key mechanism and is the tipping point for us to be able to move forward as a society, whereas under their side, they stay back and they stay regressive. I'll take OG.
So for a country that is 95% Muslim, I think if people are not talking about the corruption of the Awami League, they'll talk about Islamic fundamentalism from all the other parties that can also enter the political discourse. Why is this a better outcome?
So the first thing I want to point out is that there are a lot of other political discussions that are necessary in Bangladesh, right? So if opening government wants to talk about representing Hindus, that's one of the things in the chopping block, but it's not the most urgent. Mezen prioritizes the explanations about why we need to talk about the economy. Mezen explains why we need to prevent violence. We think that these are things that are good in status quo, and that transitions me towards my second issue about is the ban necessary. Mezen already explains that there's massive violence and incitement of the Awami League. And this is why I want to point out the contradictions under opening government, which is why they can't win this debate. The first one is that they point out that they won't be voted in because there's a chilling effect towards people voting for the Awami League. Therefore, meaning that Prime Minister's argumentation about instability of people wanting to riot against the government when you ban them doesn't exist, which means that their harm doesn't exist in the short term anyways. But even if you don't believe believe this, we would posit that the Awami League in the short term is very ensues distrust towards the current establishment, which means that we can't really move forward as a society. Like for example, in 2024, the Awami League only won because of a low voter turnout, and they also rigged elections, and they also stacked courts so that they can't be held accountable. Why is restabilizing Bangladesh more likely under our side? I have two counterfactuals. The first one is that it's likely that you allow more third parties to create transitional peace pacts with Bangladesh and all of their parties. Like for example, we think that this is likely to be China for two structural reasons. Number one, India, China, and Bangladesh are usually big trading partners that have good international relations right now. But secondly, because of the anti-West sentiment that exists, it's unlikely to be the UN's Western participants, which means, and probably because these are the closer neighbors, which means that this is more likely to be the counterfactual under our side, but also because China has done this with Myanmar and Cambodia and Thailand in status quo, which means that this is also the likely counterfactual for us to restabilize Bangladesh. Which means that when this ban exists, it's still more likely for us to stabilize it, because the counterfactual on their side is that the Awami League will try to relinquish or try to oppose any power that tries to remove them, whereas under our counterfactual, this transitional peace towards for example a re-election after this interim government actually gets to exist. But secondly, even if you don't believe this, I would posit and flip the argument coming from opening government about courts. We would posit that the problem in status quo is that it's very hard to hold the Awami League accountable because of number one, a lot of the courts are stacked against them, which means that if you ban them, you prevent them from getting any semblance or any sliver of political power that allows them to get not accountable. Which means that the counterfactual under our side is that when they are banned, we are now able to focus on what they have done rather than what they are currently doing, which means that we're far more likely to be able to put them in courts and not say for example, these are people who are still representing us, and now be able to look at it retrospectively. Why is this exclusively important? We think that this is exclusively important because this allows the people to have some semblance of catharsis for what the Awami League has done against them. Because we would posit that these Hindu minorities, sure they are good, but they can be represented through other ways. Like for example, them joining smaller parties, which we would posit gain more power under our counterfactual since the first argument. But under their counterfactual, they do not get any semblance of accountability, especially if the Awami League is still participating and still ensuing its radicalist politics. It's 6:56. Sorry. Yeah, radicalist politics. Which means that the conclusion to this argument is that it's simply necessary for us to be able to ban this because it allows us to be able to move forward as a society, move forward as Bangladesh, and access a lot of the other counterfactual and other other options that we could have had to be able to restabilize our society, which we can't if the Awami League still tries to tear us apart. All of these reasons oppose.
Thank you so much for that speech. Now calling on the member of government to open the closing half of this debate and the CG case. You're here.
Can I get some water? Banning a political party is an ineffective mechanism of going ahead and achieving anything that opposition wants to go ahead and say. The reasons for this is that their claims are largely either not feasible or just symmetric on the both sides, right? Let's break opening opposition case into two. The first thing is that they can say that if you allow the BAL to run in whatever capacity that they are able to, they go ahead and cause violence and consolidate and rally because they've been doing this and they have a history of doing this. I think that was because they were in power and they were able to legitimize this through a lot of means because they had the military and a lot of these connections. If they're not in power, I'm not sure how they have this much power to go ahead and then influence the people in that sense. But secondly, they say that they can rally because they have a lot of power, they can consolidate and go ahead and cause violence. That is still being done under the table. Why can't they do this still? I'm not unsure. So if just because the BAL isn't there as a formal entity doesn't mean that these people don't have the power to do this regardless if they want to go ahead and destabilize the government, which they have multiple incentives to do because the government is going to crack down on them. So I'm really unsure as to what their case looks like then at a point in time where their harms can be done even if the BAL is banned as a political entity. So the case then becomes a bit weak, right? But then
then notice why is the BL important to the Bangladeshi identity? Because notice that this is literally the party that make Bangladesh a manufacturing powerhouse that it is today. Which is to say that even if Bangladesh and even if Sheikh Hasina did hijack the party at some point in time and then did a lot of corruption, this doesn't take away from the fact that the BL is still the oldest party in Bangladesh. They still have a lot of money, a lot of political connections, and a lot of connections to the military. Which is to say that at a point in time where people wanted to have a successful career in Bangladesh, the BNP, when they were elected back like 15 years ago, were also ousted very quickly because of the fact that they were really corrupt and they didn't have the support from all the majorities in the country. Which is to say that a lot of politicians then shifted to Bangladesh, like the Awami League at that point in time, because they felt it was the only way to go ahead and have a successful political career then. Which is to say that something that the opposition benches completely disregard on BL and their capacity is the amount of talent that they have in terms of the kind of people that go ahead and try to form the government in this case. Because notice, right, at a point in time when you go ahead and put a blanket ban, this means that all the people who were in the BL, people who were actually doing good work in terms of how the defenses for Bangladesh were working, in terms of how they were able to stop, say, a lot of inflow of migrants, because that literally is in line with what the Bangladeshi policy looks like. These sort of things aren't that much possible at a point in time where you have a party that probably doesn't have as strong of a hold as the BL has, right? Which is to say, the BNP is very likely to fail at a point in time where they don't have the capacity, don't have the connections, and don't have say any sort of precedent to rule Bangladesh at any point in time, because these people don't have these sort of ability, these sort of connections in the first place, right? Which is to say that if you want to go ahead that we become more charitable to op, we just say that these people go ahead and, like, if you go ahead and send these people to other parties, that still doesn't take away from the accountability that you hold on to them. Yes.
So perhaps at the start of its infancy, it was a good political party, but the reason for the massive uprising is because it has been incredibly corrupt in recent years.
No.
Even if there are good politicians, they can go into other parties and probably support them.
No, that is the problem, right? These people are still in line with the kind of agendas the BAL had, which is to say that at a point in time where you remove corruption is going to be there on both sides. So it's very unclear as to why they can go ahead and run with a separate political party that has a completely separate political agenda and caters to a different crowd of people, right? Which is to say that if the base that Bangladeshi people, if the base that the BAL is catering to is still the sort of people who cares about their minority sentiments, is the people who care about their religious sentiments and the sort of things, the sort of policies that the BAL was aligned to, I'm fundamentally unsure as to how they're going to be able to find another suitable party of that much power to go ahead and integrate into the system properly. Which is to say that you go ahead and need the BAL for Bangladesh to go ahead and look reliable and the national scale, right? Because notice how this works, right? In terms of you go ahead and blanket banning the whole party, I think the alternative needs to look like, if people were at fault, which they obviously were, you go ahead and pinpoint these people, which is to say that you pinpoint as to where these people were at fault, who was at fault, and you go ahead and try them at a large scale. I think this is really good for these people, or good for the people of Bangladesh, because this not only separates the sort of say bad people who did do a lot of corruption and the people who did do a lot of these bad faith practices that opposition benches try to talk about, but this also means that you go ahead and try people who had allegations of not being, say, who had allegations of probably not being as bad, and then you go ahead and like get these people out, or you probably clear their name, right? Because notice the career of these politicians which were successful and had the capacity of going ahead and be able to combat a lot of problems that Bangladesh would face, considering that it's going through a lot of instability, fundamentally goes away on their paradigm, because these people don't go ahead and go to other parties and get the same amount of power or the ability to get elected in. But at a point in time where you go ahead and clear these people's name, at a point in time where these people get legitimacy that, oh, these people weren't the bigger problem, because it wasn't the entire party that was corrupt, right? It was the people at the top of the party that went ahead and consolidated a lot of power, put their family members in positions of power, and went ahead and embezzled a lot of money and things like this. I don't think that particularly happens for everybody among the party, but at a point in time the party is blanket banned. I think what this harms is a lot of people who were in this party that could have contributed positively to Bangladesh, which is to say that a large chunk of people that are in the BL get tagged that, oh, this person is from the BL gets banned as a whole, which means that you go ahead and disallow a lot of good political talent to show up and fight for elections in Bangladesh. This becomes particularly harmful then, and why on the comparative we take it much better is because we go ahead and tell you that at a point in time when you clear these people's name, this not only makes the BL and its politicians in a better position, but this also makes the BNP look more legitimate, and this also makes the BNP look much better in terms of how they're perceived by the people. Why is this so? Because notice, you look like a weak government at a point in time where you go ahead and say that, oh, the opposition was bad and none of them should be able to compete at any point in time, right? At a point in time where multiple people at a granular level are able to say that, okay, the BNP does better. I think at a point in time for people who are acquitted of their charges by the when they're put on trial by the BNP, I think that becomes even better, because now these people have an easy eventually an entry point into the BNP, because then the ideological difference becomes a lot lower, because the story becomes more palatable for why these people go ahead and make this political change, which on the comparative would probably look like, oh, you just switch your political identity because, and just completely like switch the voter base that you cater to at all points in time. This becomes then important because notice that at a point in time where you want to go ahead and retain the sort of ability Bangladesh has to look better in the global front, I think you need to go ahead and get the best sort of talent, and that Bangladesh had not been doing. I think the idea on talent and the extension on talent of political leaders is very important, because if Bangladesh wants to rebuild itself, if Bangladesh wants to go ahead and curtail the amount of violence that is happening, you need to go ahead and have people who have the ability to do these sort of things. You need to have people who have these sort of connections with the military. You need to go ahead and have these people that have connections abroad. And I think people who have been in the government, people who weren't explicitly corrupt, had the ability to do this a lot better than other politicians then. I think this exclusively proves to you that if you want a Bangladesh that goes ahead and operates in the best way possible, this only happens when you get people from both sides to get the most efficient allocation of who does what better in Bangladesh. I don't think this particularly happens in the comparative, which is when a weaker political party comes into power and their ability of governance is significantly worse, because you had a lot of people, a lot of talent shifting over to the BAL, which means that these people don't have an entry point of coming back.
Okay, thank you so much for that speech, member of government. Now calling on the member of opposition to open the case for CO. Figure.
Closing government does not have an impact, because if these people who are good were not on the top of the party, they were never anyways making any policy decisions and were never creating any impact in the Bangladeshi economy regardless. Opening opposition does not explain why the violence they talk about is anyways long term and is not going to end that time only when people can see that according to OG's reasons, that the electoral system becomes legitimate and you have more choices. We'll first explain is that why BL becoming a party specifically is going to create harm for long term, which already beats opening opposition, because we are more towards the motion burden, but we also prove the harm on a long term. The first thing I want to talk about is just the extent of this harm. The young people who are probably starting new families in Bangladesh right now and are likely to create the most amount of population in Bangladesh, but also crucially that Bangladesh right now has a huge youth population in comparison to older population or younger population, specifically means these are the people who are most in power right now and have often brought in culture of distrust against the Awami League, because this is what they have been seeing in their colleges, universities, political spaces and media spaces. So the protest that they do is likely to be more harmful than any other sect that they would that would protest. The reason they would keep protesting for long term is quite full. The first thing is that when BL becomes a party, they can legitimately do things like campaigning. They can legitimately go on things like national news channels. And every time you see Sheikh Hasina campaigning or a BL leader campaigning on the rhetoric that they campaigned before, this keeps reigniting trauma every election cycle. And that proves why the violence becomes long term, because these kids always see that our past was harmed, our jobs were harmed and our families were harmed because of this party, which is again campaigning and is running a truck around my city. This is when you create more violence again and again. But second, the way that BL is likely to engage in political campaigning is not how OG says, is that they would create accountability mechanisms and call you out on economic policies. Do you know what the reason for this is? Because BL themselves failed on economic policies and social policies. The way they are likely to critique you or engage in political discussion is on things like identity, things like religion, things like class, which is the more easier way for them to win votes in comparison to economic policy. So the call-outs that OG says is good, they never prove why the quality of them is good. We give you a reason why the call-outs are likely to be more racist, more polarizing, which again keeps igniting violence every election cycle and every time these parties come. The reason that they can do only this when being a party is because you can come on national news channels and legitimate media platforms which are accessible to more amount of people in comparison to just doing this marketing in black market or probably very underground, which does not reach to a lot of people. Therefore, the violence is ignited on a larger scale when you become a party. But third is that OG already concedes that you are reversing a ban, because their framing is that you already have done things like new constitution and therefore now you will reverse and now the Awami League would come. But they never explain the process of this reversal. The issue that this process of reversal is going to be bad is this is going to fracture the NCP, which is currently in power in the interim government. Because the reason the NCP formed was on a collective notion that you want to oppose the BAL and that we all collectively hate them. When the NCP and the interim government themselves decide to reverse this ban, you're likely to cause a big fracture fracture in the NCP themselves, which are likely to again create violence and protest because students feel betrayed. Students feel betrayed by the very student leaders who promise them that they will give them power and give them a good constitution. This exclusively means that BL as a party now get a leverage power to negotiate against these student leaders and cause them to horse trade, cause them to fracture more, because this allows BL to gain more and more power because their opposition is crumbling. And this can only happen when BL is a party, because they can give them an alternative that come to our party, which they cannot give on a comparison when they are banned, because there is no alternative that they can provide to these student leaders. But also this fracturing never happens because you are never reversing a ban. That means. But fourthly, BL gets more information in parliament because you can sit on bills, you can negotiate in bills, and you often become a kingmaker in these bill-making things, because there is a BNP and NCP who are getting majority of votes. So often BL becomes the tipping point as to what bill should be passed or not, and people have to rally with them. That means you need to give concessions to BL when making these bills, and if all benches agree that BL is bad, this means exclusively when BL becomes a party and get into the parliament, makes the bills and the money that the bills are going to create for people, the jobs that these bills are going to create for people, reduce, because the BL gets a power to say how they want money from it. And they're likely to do the worst amount of decisions making in the parliament because they want to villainize the parties who are in power. Because if OG agrees that BL is not winning, they still have incentive to win. And the way you are likely to win is by hurting the party who is in power right now. And the way you hurt is by making those bills as worse as possible you can, as critical as you can, and make the implementation of them as harmful as you can on the ground. This means on a comparative, even if BL does not win, Bangladesh suffers more because BL has the exclusive power to hurt the political space. Then the second thing I want to talk about is the comparative, which again opening opposition just magically misses, because they never explain in the absence of BL why Bangladesh can get some sort of trust and the perception betters. The first thing is the interim government is being headed by Muhammad Yunus, who is a Nobel laureate, and a lot of Bangladeshis just generally trust him because he fed 1 million of Bangladeshis. He has gone international recognition, but also has done the interim government job before also. That means most people just trust him that he will run the interim government good. But second, the youth comes from both sects. The youth was both Hindu and Muslim, because the youth was not getting jobs because of the reservation policy that BL has pushed onto them, because the army that BL was helping more in comparison to the youth and giving them jobs. And if you do not get a job, if you do not get food to put on your table, you're more likely to care about your life than your just identities in general, which you can still get because NCP is not anti-Hindu. So you are probably still getting jobs with NCP and but also not hurting your identity. Therefore, a lot of youth, irrespective of what sect you come from, is likely to feel good on our side of the house and is likely to be violent on comparison. But third is that the NCP is infiltrated with experts, academics and bureaucrats who never wanted to associate with BL because they never got any power to create any decision making. That means a lot of times the people in Bangladesh trust educated people because they think these people are not partisan. These people are likely to create good policy but also have capacity to create good policy. That's why on comparison, large number of Bangladeshis, irrespective of where they come from, trust the party on comparative.
The Awami League just got ousted by popular will due to corruption. No one is going to listen to them until they can provide some hard answers as to why it's going to be different. This is because every other party will attack them on this.
Exactly. No one wants to listen to them, but when they become a party, they are coming to you and telling you what we are and trying to villainize the other party that you really like. And this is why you're going to hurt the BL more, because you can see actively around every time that BL is still having power, still coming on news channels, still is on the ballot. And if you agree that people do not want to see BL, that just strengthens my own mechanisms. When they become a party, this legitimizes violence much more. But on a comparative, fourth, the new constitution has already replaced a lot of people in the election commission and Supreme Court with centrists who were previously bought by the BAL. That means people see this in media, people see this in news articles every time that the new judge is good, that the new person in the election commission is good, and they're likely to trust these institutions more because these institutions are at least giving them more money, giving them more power, which is more important than the identity thing, because they never explain why the NCP is anti-Hindu to begin with. And this is more important than OG's political integrity, because if people do not trust the institution more, having more choices does not create any value, because people are not going to vote to begin with. That means it is more important for people to go to vote before you create more choices for people to vote, because it's also unclear what is the value from this choice that they create if it is for the minorities who are anyways going to be happy on a comparative with the institutions that we set up.
Thank you so much for that speech, member of opposition. Now calling the government whip to close the case for CG and government as a whole. Here.
Cool. I'll take a PI preferably from can I have a sip of water if you have? Yeah, water.
I have extra bottle. We're just gonna take it. It's like not yet used.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. 3, 2, 1, go. I think. 3, 2, 1, go. I think the entire op-bench misses out the point that comes from OG's first minute of speech, which is these high commissions, these courts that are going ahead and being formed, which are trying to point out individuals who are at fault are happening regardless of the ban. The ban is an added mechanism to it. What does this mean? This means people who were at fault are already being identified and pulled out of the system, which means you don't need a blanket ban to exist to go ahead and filter out all the bad things coming at opening opposition, closing opposition. Opening opposition case is that BAL was a party who went ahead and did bad things. Yes, but the problem is there were specific individuals within BAL, with the scapegoat being the main supreme leader of Sheikh Hasina, who was at fault of this. Sheikh Hasina's investigation files that are coming out right now are hinting at probably one of the biggest political scams that ever happened. The extent of corruption that was top heavy is significantly more, which is there are people specifically at fault that need to be pointed out. A ban that blanketly exists doesn't solve that problem. So the problem opening opposition and closing opposition have are being solved only through this specific resolution mechanism, where you filter out people, put them through legislative mechanisms, and get them the retribution that is necessary for them, and get them punished through proper legislative channels. Why is this good? This is good because this establishes faith in current government. The current government goes ahead and looks weak. But the second reason, this is what opening government misses out. You can only use your political leverage for one thing, i.e., people would want me to go ahead and take action against people responsible for all the bad things that happened in Bangladesh. There are two ways you can hold them accountable. Either you go ahead and place a ban on them. If I take this tokenistic measure, the amount of political capital I will then devote for high commissions, for joint commissions to go ahead and then pick out individual, or for legislative bills to be passed, or for courts to go ahead and have proceedings for people genuinely at fault, is going to be less, because political, social and economic capital is limited. Which means if ban continues to exist, there is very less likely that the high commissions that OG points out in their mechanisms will work effectively, because the ban is actually cutting out on the high commissions to work effectively, because you don't go ahead and allow for you don't go ahead and have enough this urgency in people to go ahead and lobby for these legislative checks for these joint commissions, because people at some level are happy with the tokenistic representation. Oh, these people have already been banned, but that is not enough. You need these people to realize that you need to pinpoint specific individuals and move forward. Then CO, let's move on to CO. CO tells me that young people will keep fighting because they will see BAL coming on to the television and saying bad things. It's just unintuitive. You have been ousted for being one of the biggest criminals against humanity for last 15 years. Your entire population ousted you out. I don't think you're dumb enough to go ahead and then say the same things on a news channel. But secondly, if problem for closing opposition is them using racist remarks, ethnic remarks, or cultural disregard, or cultural instigating cultural violence through comments on television, I think that's just politics. Any party that you have in status quo will also go ahead and do so. Which means if you have any working democracy, there will be elements of it that go ahead and try to entice the cultural and religious aspects of it, and which will be spoken out publicly. So I think it becomes rather symmetric, and I don't think you can specifically say that BAL is the one making elections ugly, because maybe right now BNP, NCB and JIB are all together in one coalition, but in near future that might not be the case. All of them might have independent aspirations to form parties, which means they will also resort to similar mechanisms. And notice, neither of bench goes ahead and gives us a timeline of whether this ban ever gets overturned or not. Which means this leads to the same problem, which was the reason BAL became so bad. Because notice, BAL was the one that brought Bangladesh into existence, but because lack of an effective opposition for more than 50 to 60 years allowed them to go ahead and establish power systems in their mechanism as well. I don't know how the party currently in charge goes ahead and gets effective opposition on their side of the house that conserve or that stop them from making the system. Thirdly, I think lastly, I think whatever CEO is just trying to fight. CEO says that these will go ahead and fight elections. I am unsure if someone goes and votes for them. And Rishabh's analysis is already hurting himself. If say people already have so much faith in NCP because they have laureates, because they have bureaucrats, they have people who are in charge, who are well educated, I think people, and if people are so likable towards them, that already goes ahead and makes them less likely to respond to all the bad things coming from BL. Which means even if you buy CEO at their best case, they're already out of this debate because their analysis is self-hurting. At one point they say BL is going to hurt, BL is going to say bad things, but they already say that NCP has opted from people. So I think that comments coming from BL are already less effective. Let's move on to opening opposition. I think I've already pointed out first problem of opening opposition is that they don't go ahead and talk to me how we can specifically pinpoint individuals and move them out, or tell you why these we can already pinpoint individuals that go ahead and make these problems bad. So I don't know why their reason of punishing people who led extremist things in Bangladesh need to be specifically done through a blanket ban on BL. Notice, they tell me that majority of people want BL to be banned. I don't think it's always good to give it to people's requests because public is often myopic and you can't get the main culprit out if you go ahead and do a blanket ban, because blanket ban becomes the tokenistic representation that you constantly run with. You'd rather go ahead and have individuals pointed out through legal mechanisms, which allows you to go ahead and show to people that hey, we have developed these robust mechanisms that can actually pinpoint people at fault. This allows you to go ahead and build legislative channels, build administrative channels, build legal recourse mechanisms that can go ahead and punish these individuals. Thirdly, this is where my POI becomes important to leader of opposition. Their idea is that hey, my question to them is, how do these people actually affect elections if they have just been ousted because of coup against their country, because people in the country coup against the government. Their idea is though BL has power and BL can continue to affect elections from outside as well. If that is the case, and if you buy that analysis, then a ban is also equally ineffective, because if BL still retains power and still has political and economical capital to go ahead and affect people outside of the election, they can still go ahead and do it regardless of the ban. So I don't think O has a positive case in that paradigm. Then thirdly, they tell me that after the split, these people can go ahead and fight from other parties. That is bad. Why? Because they already have a tag of being associated for the BL for a longest period of time. This reduces their chances of ever being elected. But this increases propensity of bad leaders coming into power. And this reduces propensity of good leaders coming into power. And this is the extension of which CG wins. Why bad leaders get into parliament on opposition's paradigm? Because you don't have legal mechanisms that pinpoint individuals. These individuals who probably were at fault now get to fight from other parties and still come into power. And because they have history of abusing their position of power, they continue to do so. But good leaders cannot be elected because good leaders don't get their tags cleared that hey, this person was not at fault. When you do the legal recourse mechanism, when you let the high commissions work instead of the bans, you identify that these people working in BL were actually not at fault. These people get the clean chit, and this clean chit enforces their legitimacy. That's why you get good leaders coming into power. Very proud to propose.
Thank you so much for that speech, Government Whip. Now let's welcome the opposition whip speaker to give their speech here.
Just a second, please. Could you take this back? Cool. The case coming from closing opposition is rather simple. There are two things we prove. First, that this violence is going to be incredibly long-term, which fulfills the burden on opening opposition, because O is right in pointing out that there's likely to be violence. We expand the scale of this violence monumentally by explaining why these people are likely to campaign. And the rebuttal coming out of CG's whip is that the fact that you are not going to run on the same political premises again. That was not the point that Rishabh brings. Insofar as you continue to be a political party, you're likely to campaign on some sort of media platform, you're going to campaign in some sort of newspaper,
Therefore, the fact that you campaign in and of itself creates and re-triggers a lot of the trauma, the trauma of the violence, a trauma of the riots that ended up happening as a result of the existence of these parties. This is the exact reason why you continue re-triggering the trauma over and over again, which fulfills the OO burden. Secondly, we also explain the far more important thing, which is the positive comparative, because we explain to you that the existence of the BAL slows down the democratic processes that the interim government can hold because of things like you slowing down the parliamentary process. If you are elected into the parliament, in the instance where elected into the parliament, you're likely to scrutinize the interim government for every single economic decision that they take, for everything that they do. All of this would mean that you slow down the bureaucratic processes that you would require to bring about better policies. You also try more political horse trading. You suggest that you can make more money if you're a part of the BAL to the new interim government leaders, youth leaders that want to make it big in the political scene. This means that you also end up corrupting a lot of individuals who are in these parties, who are in the interim government, who end up being horse traded. Thirdly, this can also mean that the interim government can't bring attention to economic issues that are obviously incredibly important, because opening opposition is right in saying that the current problem that a lot of Bangladeshis face is the fact that there's economic instability, but opening opposition does not prove how you bring about more attention to these things. Rishabh specifically explains to you that the specific manner in which you can bring about more attention to these issues is in the absence of BAL as a party, because BAL can't continue to radicalize and continue to play on radical narratives that they have continued to do so. Instead, in the absence of these people, you can bring about more attention to the economic issues that the current government is facing. And this also means that now you have not just greater capacity but greater incentive to be a better party as the interim government. You have better capacity to take care of the Bangladeshi people a lot more. Now let's engage against GovBench. There are two things I want to do then. Firstly, against closing government. I do not think that they prove a comparative in this debate, and I certainly do not think they have an impact. The first thing they suggest is that you can pinpoint people and you force these people to address. Obviously, this can happen on both sides of the house because of legal redressals, because obviously these people are likely to be held accountable on both sides of the house legally. So closing government does not prove that there's comparative on this. The second argument that they have is that people at the top are corrupted and now the good people are harmed instead. There are three flips to this. One, I would note that you continue to be like the corrupt politicians are likely to continue being at the top insofar as they bring in the most political donations. These are the people that have the most political connections, and they can leverage these political connections through things like political lobbying. All of these things happen in the guise of power as a political party. Insofar as you continue being a political party, you can continue to corrupt a lot of lobbies, or you can corporate lobby a lot more insofar as you give them the guise that we can have more power, or you can propose more things to these people. So closing government does not prove that these people at the top are likely to be replaced. Secondly, here's the flip to the closing government argument. If there are good politicians, these good politicians can do a lot better things on our side of the house insofar as they can wash away a lot of the bad political imagery of being associated with the Awami League. Because obviously, if closing government is correct that there is a history of corruption, I would note that this history of corruption is what affects you a lot more in the instance where you're directly associated with the Awami League. This specifically means that it's far harder for you to fight on newer things, because obviously a lot of politicians have to toe the party lines. You can't be an outright radicalist and oppose everything that the people at the top are saying, which means that your capacity as a young leader to talk about better things also reduces. Thirdly, I would note that people not all people know the party members personally, and they don't exactly know which party politicians were bad. They obviously associate the Awami League as bad and not just the party politicians. I would note then that the existence of the Awami League then obviously re-triggers a lot of the things that we previously talked about. Now let's talk about opening government. They have two things to say here, which are just I do not think they are credited. Firstly, about India. I do not think India cares because Modi currently has far bigger issues to take care of. You have US tariffs or the Pakistani violence that you care obviously a lot more about, because this directly threat not only Modi's governance but a lot more of the Indian people far more directly. Secondly, India caring about political party or the political environment of Bangladesh is dependent upon the Awami League coming back to power. Obviously, insofar as OG does not prove that the Awami League is going to come back to power, this also does not prove that the Hindu people are likely to be more stable, and this also does not prove then that India is likely to care. So India, the argument around India just does not stand. Around Hindu population, Three things. Firstly, they are likely to still protest insofar as Awami League does not win, because probably they still end up feeling somewhat insecure. Obviously, opening government also again does not prove that Awami League is going to come back to power. Secondly, interim government is far more likely to take care of these Hindu individuals for three reasons. Firstly, the interim government is far more liberal. Secondly, they do not want political unrest to happen all over again, because this already has harmed the country's economy fairly significantly. Thirdly, there is a huge amount of political fatigue. Insofar as you continue a cycle of violence over and over again, this also hurts your economy. This also hurts the Indian people or the Hindu people that are in this country to be able to go back to their businesses and to be able to do their jobs over and over again. This means that opening government had a huge burden to prove that these Hindu people are likely to protest over and over again, which they do not do.
Filibustering and identity politics are bad, but these are things that all current parties like the Islamist fundamentalists and the BNP do as well. You don't magically achieve nuanced policy debates just by banning the...
No, but you have the greater capacity to be able to do so in the absence of the Awami League, because there's a lot of historical trauma attached with them. This is the case coming out of closing opposition. Lastly, why you can't hold these people accountable and why you re-trigger the collective memories a lot more, which ends up washing out the entirety of the government. Two things to say here. Firstly, you cannot redress, because OG asserts that you can just redress these people. Issues are far more deep-rooted insofar as you've been in power for so long. You have created such amount of hurt that is structural in nature, because the party has continued to seep in corruption through the existence of the government and through like layers of the government over and over again, which means that the existence of the party means that you can't exactly redress the individuals that are hurt. But far more importantly, I would know that you, insofar as you come on to the media and you do a lot of campaigning, you are likely to enrage a lot more people insofar as you're still directly engaging with the Awami League. But two, if opening government is correct that these people want to wash away the image of them being corrupt, you're likely to do even more campaigning, because you want to portray that you are better now. You want to portray that you are far better than the previous government. If that is true, then you probably do a lot more political campaigning, a lot more aggressively. You're present on more media spaces, and that hurts a lot more individuals. This triggers a lot more of the collective memory of the individuals that were hurt.
Alright, thank you so much for that speech. Thank you everyone for a wonderful debate. Please shake hands from the house and leave the room. We will call you back by 15-minute mark.